Hey folks, welcome to another episode of our Alumni Chat Series. Here today I have Rahi, who is an alumni of Romero Mentoring Analyst Prep Program, and he's actually a mentor and a working professional now in private equity. So I'm very excited to host this chat session and actually get to speak to Rahi, which has a lot of experience. And I think this is going to be very insightful for many of you that want to get into investment banking or even private equity. So with that being said, Rahi, how's it going, buddy?
It's going well. I'm looking forward to this alumni chat series. Obviously, I've been part of the Romero program, since I got to probably come, I think it was like 2016, 2017 when I did this program. So it was, sort of just starting, and now it's sort of just grown. And now I returned back as a mentor, a few months ago, and it's been a phenomenal experience to see kind of where we were, where we are now, and kind of just the talent that we built up. And I'm really excited to kind of share some of my story, my experiences, both my problems that I encountered, solutions I was able to find in order to get to where I am. So I'm really excited.
Great. No, I do remember when you first did the program. Was it in 2016 or 2017, the cohort that you were part of?
So it was, I believe, the summer going into so it was the summer between 2016 and 2017. So I think it was in 2017. That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So you were definitely early. I think in our first year of doing this program and piloting what is now has turned into our Analyst Prep Program. And you've definitely went through the experience. You got to see how probably that helped you during your internships and then perhaps securing your job offer. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your story, where you went to school, where you grew up, what you did straight out while you were an undergrad, and then you transitioned into working as an analyst at JP Morgan. So I think it would be interesting to know a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm happy to share that. So, I was born and raised in Chicago, actually. So, it was a small suburb next to O'Hare, about 10 minutes away. So I was born and raised here. And actually, the interesting thing about my background, I'll get into it a little bit because it's sort of important in my path and why Romero Mentoring Program was so helpful for me. So my parents are actually immigrants from India. I was a low income student, so my parents barely know English. So when I told them I wanted to do finance in college, they're like, "So what exactly is Wall Street? Like, what is this? What is JP Morgan?" Like, they had no idea, right? And that was, I think that's sort of a story that resonates with a lot of folks that sort of come into our Romero Mentoring Program. Folks who are super talented, super smart, have a big passion, but they're not sure exactly sort of how to achieve those goals, and we can help them here, right? And so, kind of my background, I went to Princeton University, which it was an awesome experience. I majored in financial engineering. I was also involved in a few clubs on campus, so I made that impact. As I mentioned earlier, I started in 2015 at Princeton. Did this program in summer of 2017, so my sophomore year going into my junior, and it was a great decision I made that I can get into further. After that, I decided to join JP Morgan as a full-time analyst there. And it was actually funny, and this is sort of a little bit interesting about my recruiting experience I can talk about as well. But I actually interned at Barclays in their technology M&A group, and then I was able to sort of shift over full-time into JP Morgan, where I covered banks for 2 years. So I was an M&A analyst, did that for 2 years. During that period, actually, unfortunately, I had some family health issues that I really was close to. So I decided that I wanted to make an impact in healthcare. So even though I did banks and I covered, financial institutions for 2 years, I did a handful of transactions, which was awesome. I decided that I wanted to be in healthcare. I think one of the cool things about finance, honestly, is that you can use your skill set, right? The skills you learn in Romero Mentoring, in banking, wherever you kind of get these skills, and you can apply them to any sort of industry you want to work in, right? So I decided to move to the buy side. So I wanted to do investing, business, finance, but I wanted to make an impact in healthcare. So I moved to a fund here in Chicago called Chicago Pacific Founders, and we focus exclusively on healthcare services. And it's been, I've been here for 14 months, and all the skills and knowledge that I've gained have been amazing. So that's a little bit about my background.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go back to your internship summer at Barclays. What was the recruiting experience like? And what do you think are the essential skills to know or have when going through the recruiting period, right? Because, most of our students are undergraduate students. They're either freshmen, sophomore, even juniors, and they're still recruiting for these kind of internships. So what was your experience like when you got Barclays, and what do you think was essential for you to getting that offer?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Mr. Romero. And I think when I think about it now, it was actually funny. So my sophomore year, when I sort of heard about the program, I was in a corporate finance club and I heard about the program and I was like, this is actually perfect for me. And one of the things I think was challenging for me was I was actually an engineer by academic. So actually I was in engineering school.
Mm,
So I took a lot of math, computer science class, right? Which I know a lot of students that we have, have wide array of interest. So I realized that in order for me to be prepared to really recruit for junior internships, which is my Barclays internship, I really needed a fundamental knowledge of corporate finance, accounting, valuation, modeling. And that's the stuff that classes at Princeton would just not teach me, right? We had one class maybe in accounting, right? But I think that that's why, so first I'll just take a step back. That's why I joined Romero Mentoring in the summer of 2017.
okay.
So that really taught me a lot about some of these fundamentals because I just talked about. So then recruiting really started kind of that spring of my sophomore year. And I know things have sort of changed recently. So this was almost like 4 or 5 years ago, right? So, but I think at that time, we had sort of some of these banks come to campus and we would host information sessions, right? And, we would sort of go there, meet with alumni, from that school. They would talk about the program. And I think one of the skills I think is really important. And I really tell, even as a mentor currently, I tell a lot of the current students, just be passionate, right? I think it's really important to show your passion. And it's not just about being, hey, like I want to do banking and I love this, right? But kind of what have you done, in sort of your path to that, right? So either you're following the news, you're following companies, if you're interested in banking specifically, following M&A transactions. And actually, it was funny, I didn't know a lot of this until the mentoring program with Mr. Romero, because he mentioned some of these skills and some of these ideas. And I'm like, hey, maybe I can read the Wall Street Journal, find a deal I like. So I think those are some of the skills. So it's not even all about kind of the hard technical skills during recruiting, because at that point you're trying to show your passion. But once I had my interviews, right, so I did round one, round two, I had my super day. That's when the knowledge that I had through the Romero program really helped me, right? Because I knew about the valuation questions, I knew about modeling, I knew about companies, how to analyze them. And one of the stories I like to share a lot is, so I actually, and I don't even know if Mr. Romero remembers this, but one of the projects I did with him as an intern in that summer was actually the equity research report on GNC. So it's a retail company, retail
I
platform.
remember that.
And actually, so I put together this deck for him, and we had a lot of discussions, a lot of iterations, and it was a really good experience. So during my Barclays Super Day, one of the MDs had asked me, what kind of companies am I following? So automatically I went to GNC because it was one of the companies that I did this whole pitch on. And he was so amazed at the knowledge that I had and the way that I pitched the stock. And I think I had a sell rating on it, actually, not even a buy rating, and kind of the way that I described it and the way that he was able to see my thought process. These kind of things I would have not learned in school, right? So I think that's where some of my passion came out, my interest in finance and my knowledge. So that's a little bit about the recruiting process.
No, I think that's insightful. It's funny that you mentioned GNC because at the time, I think the stock was down over 70%. They were going through some sort of restructuring. I think they had a lot of debt. And there was another one that was competing with them. Another competing retail brand was Vitamin Shop.
Yep,
it was a major competitor. And then you had other alternative businesses coming into that space. So I kind of wanted to see what was going on, but it's good that you mentioned that deal. But going back to your main point, you said passion. You know, I hear a lot that a lot of people throw the word passion out there loosely. I was part of a guest speaker series this past week with Scholars of Finance, their UCLA chapter. And one of the students has the same thing. And I said, look, I think what you can control is effort. And by effort, I mean, don't wait for someone to teach you, don't wait for the internship for you to see what financial modeling is, for you to learn valuation, for you to learn about the stock market, because by that point, it's probably going to be too late. You're going to be competing with other kids that have already taken initiative. Maybe their family already works in the industry and they're ahead of you just for other things that they've done on their own. So you got to take action and matters into your own hands. And you just got to be very proactive. So, for myself, when I first started, I opened up a trading account. I started buying and selling stocks, and I bought every book that I could possibly get my hand on to understand what stock was, what's technical analysis, chart patterns, then valuation, a DCF, and all of these things. But initially, I was self-taught, and I took all of the knowledge that I've gained, all of the work that I did on my own, including my own independent research reports, and I would take them with me during interviews. And the interviewers, they were very impressed. But what impressed them more was I took action. I took a lot of initiative. So if you're really passionate about something, you're going to take initiative and you're going to figure things out on your own. And once you get the internship, once you are in a corporate environment, you're going to improve on the details. You're going to improve on the standard of providing or showcasing your work, which is one of the things that we hear a lot in banking. And I keep stressing to students in our program is always deliver client-ready work. That means professional formatting, alignment, things that looks clean and polished and it makes sense. In academia, they don't teach you these things because the ultimate person looking at your work is your teacher, your professor, right? They're not incentivized to pay you. But in the corporate world, when a CEO or board of directors looking at the presentation in your analysis, well, you better make sure it looks good. So all of those, I would say, traits, you can just develop it individually by just taking action. And those are, I would say, one of the philosophies or approach that has gotten me to this level. There's another video of mine when I was a guest speaker. This is back in 2006 when I was a sophomore at Baruch. And I was actually speaking about that. I had freshly come from a rotational experience at Bank of America, 5 weeks investment banking, 5 weeks sales and trading, and I got a return offer. And the reason why I was able to get that offer was because I had mapped out, the S&P 500 PE multiple. I understood capital inflow and outflows from different industry. I understood trends. I understood how to project earnings. And I would create my own analysis and portfolio of work, and I would bring it to the interview, and then I would walk them through it. So they were pretty impressed with the technical skills. And I said, look, you just got to take matters into your own hands. So the same thing I was saying as a sophomore is the same philosophy, is the same approach that I still take on today. So I hope that gives a little bit more insight in terms of passion. What about your investment banking experience? What was that actually like, right? Because you hear a lot of students that want to do banking because of the prestigious, the pay, but it's far from the truth once you're actually working at the office. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your investment banking experience? What was that like, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you care to share some insights?
Yeah, no, sure. That's a great question. And I agree with you. I mean, that's one of the advices that I still also give a lot of, like, make sure that this is something you want to do, right? And it relates to passion, right? I mean, what I truly think is, it's sort of most analyst programs on the street and other sort of even boutique banks, they're usually 2 years, right? And sometimes they might stretch to 3. So, it's sort of a commitment you make, right? And I think you have to have passion and really good, strong purpose behind that, that reason, right? And then because, as Mr. Romero just mentioned, there is a lot of sort of ugly in the sense, you are working long hours. It's a very high intense environment, which I thought, was probably underappreciated, even though it's investment banking or, if you could be in sales and trading, it's very intense, right? I mean, you're working with the smartest people, you're doing all these deals, transactions that are really going to change the landscape of the economy. And you want to make sure that you're really focused, right? So I think my experience personally was really shifted probably into 2 ways. I started my job in 2019 and then COVID hit in 2020. So like 1 year, it was like basically in person. The other year was all remote. So I had a little bit of a unique experience, but some of the things that I think are still important are like, being intellectually curious, right? I mean, you're going to come, especially if you do this program, you're going to come with a lot of good skills and knowledge, right? And tools to really jumpstart you ahead of a lot of your peers, right? But, as you may know, a lot of these banks, especially like a bulge bracket like JP Morgan, has their own training program, right? But I think, a training program is only a training program as much as you make it, right? I think it's really important for you to continue to ask questions, right? And that was one thing I did initially when I got into my desk. The other thing was I was covering banks, which was completely different than technology companies that I was doing the summer before. So I really had to ask a lot of questions, which I still think is super important, right? That's one of the tips I like to give. Just ask a lot of questions, right? You have associates, you have vice presidents. So that's one thing. Two, and I think Mr. Romero mentioned this, make sure you always thinking about client-ready work, right? That was a lot of things. That was a huge focus at, in my group, right? It's the folks who paid attention to detail, right? Attention to detail is super important. Making sure that your numbers tie, for example. And, and this I think can be good and ugly, right? I think ugly is you have to really focus on that and really put your mind to it. The good thing is some of these skills you learn in banking, forget about the deals, forget about the finance and the technical, just some of the corporate workplace skills, right? You get, right, how to work in a team, how to communicate, right? How to set deadlines, how to meet those deadlines, right? So that's another piece that I really got to gain a lot, right? That I think it's helping me even in my career now. And then kind of the last piece I would say is like mentorship and just building relationships, right? And Mr. Romero talked a lot about this to me, right? Just building my network and having a strong network, right? And I think, well, how you can do that is, right, the people you engage with, right? Whether that be a CFO of a company that you're helping, right? If you're doing some sort of pitch for them, or it's your MD, right, that you're presenting to, make sure that you build these relationships, right? Treat people nicely, make sure you ask questions, show your passion, right? Be a professional, right? Effectively. And I think my engagement with Mr. Romero, actually, when we would review my decks that I did for him, kind of helped me with that, right? Because I understood, okay, how do I have to present to Mr. Romero? What kind of questions will he ask me? How do I present my stuff in a professional manner? So a lot of those skills, honestly, were just amplified, right? Things I did in my internship with Mr. Romero were just amplified. I think that's kind of some of the highlights also, but some of the ugly, right? But I think it really helps you in your career. So that's important.
Yeah, no, that's a good insight. I remember myself when I started in M&A at CS, I didn't have the experience or the in-depth level of training that you guys receive with the analyst program that we've created here. And part of the reason why I created the analyst program was because at one point I felt very insecure when I joined my M&A team, and I would see how other analysts would be ahead of me in terms technically building the models more complex than I could. And I would just wonder, like, how do they know these things? Like, wait a minute, we both started at the same level. We just got the same training for the whole firm. How are they ahead of me? What's going on? And then I would do a little more digging. I was like, oh, okay. So you went to Wharton, you learn LBO. They go more in depth into the the school that I went to did not provided this. Okay. So your dad was an investment banker. You see, and then I begin to put the pieces together. And I would say to myself, it's like, okay, it's not that I'm not any smarter or less smarter than them. It's just they had the information sooner than me, and they have a competitive advantage. And one of the reasons why I did the program is because I wish I would have access to this when I was at the undergraduate level, freshman year, thinking to myself, what is finance? What is a stock? And going through this entire journey of learning all sets of discipline. But what holds you back is when you start full-time with other students or other first-year analysts that have already received that training and can basically do more sophisticated analysis and work on more complex deals. Those are typically the analysts or the students that will be ranked top-tier analysts. And then it takes you about 6, 12, maybe 15 months to be 100% functional, whereas might take then maybe 2 or 3 months to get to that point. So it's very important to develop these things on your own before you join the firm, so that you can maximize the experience of every deal. Really look at it from the CEO perspective, the managing director perspective. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to show? Why are we even showing this? And then when you get to the point where you can even add value and maybe take a different approach to what a VP is trying to state or showcase on a slide, you're at that level. You're already at that level where, like, okay, you're way ahead of the curve. And those are some of the things, obviously, that we're trying to teach here. Why private equity? I know you mentioned that you wanted to have an impact in healthcare, but why do it through private equity instead of going the entrepreneurship route, or maybe working at a startup or at a VC? So why the private equity route as opposed to other alternative paths?
Yeah, no, that's another great question, and something I had to think about a lot. I'm like, if I want to do healthcare, I can just go work for a healthcare company, a startup, or maybe build my own business, right? Or I can do private equity. And I think one of the cool things about private equity that I've learned, and I'm still very young in my career in buy side. It's only been 14 months, but one of the things that's cool about private equity, because when you come to the buy side, so just for folks who might not know exactly what it is, so in the investment banking, you're really advising, right? You're on the sell side. You're advising these management teams on how they should, position their company for sale and how they should value those companies, right? When they're going out and selling their company. On the buy side, you're really becoming the investor yourself, right? So now you're the person who's going to go out and buy companies, right? And so in private equity, the typical thing is, you sort of take the capital you raise from investors, you buy a company, and then you hold it for, 5 to 6 years, and then you sell it for a return, right? Hopefully, and during those 5 years, you try to add value, you try to create new partnerships, you acquire other businesses to kind of merge with that business. So there's a lot of strategies, right, and growing organically. So what I thought would be really cool, especially if I want to make an impact in healthcare, but I really didn't know much about healthcare, right, going in. And what private equity allows you to do is you can work on multiple investments, right? So it's not just you just have to focus on. So for example, if I went to go work for a startup, I would now only be working for that startup, that business model specifically in their vision, right? In private equity, at least for a few years, if I do this, I can gain a sense of the broader landscape of healthcare, right? So my firm focuses on healthcare services, but there's a lot within it, right? And when I look at our portfolio, we have about like 23 portfolio companies right now. When I look at all of them, there's obviously, there's things that are similar. They're also very different, right? The markets that they tackle within the US, the stuff they actually do to deliver better patient care. So there's a wide array of businesses that I can now look at and understand, which will give me in turn a better understanding of the market, right? And so that's kind of one piece I thought was really awesome. The second piece is, the buy side, why I think it's really cool in private equity is because you can really learn where to best allocate your capital, right? Now you're the person who's sort of making the decisions, right? So I think being able to learn, hey, what things work, which businesses work, what models work, that gives you a sense of, hey, where should I put my money, right? So I think there's probably two reasons, and I think they both made sense for me at that time in my career. So
okay, yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. So now you're definitely wearing the hat of an investor, and you're evaluating and analyzing these businesses. Is there a framework or an investment philosophy at the firm that you're currently working at that is behind all of the investments that they make?
Yeah, so I mean, just besides, I think so. Investors have to underwrite their deals to a certain, sort of multiple on invested capital, which is effectively, if you put $10 in and then you're able to gain 30, you return 3 times the money. So obviously, we have our base returns that we have to underwrite to, right?
Okay.
So I think that's kind of some of our investing philosophy. The other way that we really think about our businesses is like a partnership model, right? So I think one of the special things about my private equity firm that I think, one of the things that attracted me to it was, hey, it's not just about allocating capital, when you're making an investment, right? But it's like, how can we support these businesses and help them grow, right? Whether that be improving their financial processes, helping them go into a different market, helping them maybe get more customers in for a certain product. What are we doing to actually help grow the business organically, right? And that's something as an investor, I think it's really important, right? It's not just about putting in the money and you're done. It's actually about how you grow these businesses, right? And I think a lot of the skills that I got from banking, right, how to think about business, how to think about M&A, how to think about finance and accounting, has actually really helped me, right? Because you can understand the numbers behind the initiatives you're putting into place. So, for example, if you decide to really enter a different market, for example, for one of our companies, how does that affect our returns, right? How does that affect the profitability of the company going forward? Well, these are some of the skills that I'm using for my banking or my Mr. Romero's program. That I might not necessarily have had, right, if I never had those experiences. Yeah. So our investment philosophy is definitely a partnership model, I would say.
Okay. And what would you say is the most challenging part of your job?
Yeah. And I think similar to banking, I think the challenge is really, there's just a lot of stuff on your plate, right? So you're juggling, different deals, multiple portfolio companies, new deals, existing deals. So there's just a lot of stuff on your plate, right? And you only have a certain amount of hours in a day to work on it, right? So I think one of the skills that I've learned a lot and really try to hone in on, and I'm still working on, is time management, right? That's been one of the challenges. In banking, it was definitely there, right? And then in private equity, even though you have a little bit more independence, a little bit more sort of, you can really manage your time a little bit more sort of independently. There's still a lot of stuff to get done, right? So I think one of the skills that I really focus on is, hey, like, what is important, right? What is a priority for today, for this week? And then emphasize that, right? Because you can't get everything done in one day, right? So you might have a to-do list. What is important today that I need to get done? What can I push off to tomorrow, right? And kind of being able to manage your time and trying to, create value where you can. So I think that's kind of been my biggest challenge.
Yeah, time management. That's actually one of my essential skill set that has allowed me to do everything that I'm able to do. It's essentially time management. And when I mean time management, I mean it's just work, prioritizing all of the tasks associated with Romero Mentoring and building an edtech platform, then mentoring, creating content, working with students, thinking about the strategy of the business. It's just about knowing how to compartmentalize and having a list of things that that has to be done on this specific day, next week, and so on, and being just very disciplined and not wasting time. So, that's something that we definitely try to teach our students. That we have a spreadsheet where we actually walk them through mapping out what Monday will look like, Tuesday will look like, all the way to Sunday. And then once you have your 8 hours of school, 3 hours of leisure, then 3 hours of learning any type of professional program, you have a 16-hour workday. Do that Monday through Friday. Weekends, take it a little bit slower, and then do it again. And now stretch that out for 12 to 15 weeks, basically a quarter. And you'll be surprised how much they learn and how they begin to operate at a much higher level when we kind of outline and quantify how they're spending their time. One of the things we learned is that 33% of their time is spent sleeping during the week. The other 31% of the time is spent in schoolwork. About 10 to 12 or 14%, depending on when you're at, is spent just commuting. And then the other 11% or so is just wasteful time. The 11% that people are wasting within our program, when we map it out, for some people, that could be 40% of their time is just wasting it. So it's interesting when you just map things out on a spreadsheet and you're kind of looking at yourself like a business, like an entity. How are you prioritizing your time for this week? What's your quarterly plan for Q1, Q2, Q3, and 4? What is your long-term annual goal? And then where do you want to be the following 2-3 years from that? So we take that kind of approach to our students. What would you say for students that want to break into either finance, investment banking, or private equity? What would you say are some of the essential character traits or personality traits that you've seen across the board from everyone that you've encountered that is just an essential must-have in terms of your personality to be in finance or in private equity?
Yeah, so I mean, I've touched on a couple, sort of in my other answers and other discussions we just had, including like being, have a good passion for finance. And everyone I've seen that sort of made it, right? So like, because we had folks in our sort of investment banking program that might have started, and then within a year or 6 months, they're sort of, finding another role because, either they just don't have, enough passion to continue working some of these hours. And, as Mr. Romero just described, 16 times 5, right? It's not easy. So I think that's one thing, right? Just having a true passion and really they really want to really analyze these businesses. They like modeling. Personally, I was, big into financial modeling. So that was something that I really enjoyed, right? Like I enjoyed kind of doing these analyses and seeing what the outputs were. So that's kind of something you have to just develop as your own. So that's one trait that I really saw. But it's not like everyone has to do that, right? If you're more interested in deal making and you like building relationships with clients, I mean, that's another fundamental skill as well, right? That becomes more important as you climb the corporate ladder. So that's another skill that you might have, right? But just finding what you like about the job and really sort of live that purpose, right? The other thing I think is just perseverance, right? And I think this is not only on the job, but kind of, recruiting, and sort of networking with people as well as doing interviews and then and the job, right? You just really have like a hardworking and have a persevering attitude, right? I mean, this is not a sort of a place where it's very easy or, it's very competitive, right? It's not only competitive in the job itself, but also just getting a job itself, right? So I think having a persevering attitude, right? I mean, it's not like I've got, every job that I applied to investment banking, I was able to get. Not every interview that I did resulted in an offer, right? But the key was I kept going, right? I never felt discouraged. I kept going. If there was a question on interview that I didn't know, that maybe that's the reason I didn't get that job, I would go home, I would do all the research, I would contact my network, I would maybe even contact Mr. Romero, be like, what do you think about this question? How can I best answer it? Just finding resources, right? And being resourceful is probably the other thing, right? Is not everyone's going to hand you stuff on a platter, even in your role, right? You have to seek out these mentors. You have to seek out, folks that you can ask questions to. It's not complicated, but it's also not a walk in the park, right? So I think just having perseverance, being resourceful, asking the right questions. I think those are a few of the character traits that I think have really helped. And you can notice in my answer, I did not say, you have to be super smart. It's more about perseverance, I would say. So
yeah. No, definitely. I think perseverance is very important. I do find that a lot of the students in our program, many of them are very competitive too. They are overachievers, and the ones that may not be an overachiever, but they find things that really excites them about finance and the industry. For example, I was talking to Emron a while back, and I asked him, why finance? What is it that you like about finance? And he said, well, finance affects every part of our lives. It affects what we spend at the gas pump, what we spend when we're buying groceries, even rent, right, through inflation. So it affects everything. And it's actually money. It's a universal language. When you are transacting with someone, that transaction is just a form of communication. It's an exchange of values. And it's quite interesting that I do see students perhaps that may not, go to a target school, may not have a 4.0 GPA, but they love numbers and how finance just affects every area of our life. And then that curiosity lets them to wanting to learn more. And that hunger for knowledge just helps them kind of commit and do the necessary work to fully transform themselves into a top competitive candidate. So it's definitely perseverance, but finding what is it that you like about the industry and hone in on that to open, let's say, a Pandora's box on how deep you can go into the industry. So I think perseverance is definitely extremely important, like you've mentioned. With that being said, do you have any final words, last piece of advice to our students and our audience?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the only advice I'll give is, at least for me, and you can probably tell from how many times I referenced the program in my different experiences, but it worked like wonders for me, right? And I think one of the things that, and, I mean, again, as I mentioned, it's kind of what you make out of it. So, for all the Romero mentoring students that we have, future students, I would just make sure when you guys are, accepting the program, you're able to enroll and you're able to participate, do it with a very diligent attitude, right? Know that it pays off, and don't take it for granted, right? I think a lot of these things are just, it's just a training module or just, a video that's on the platform. Well, I think every detail in them, you'll remember back, like now I know why that works like that, or now I know why I'm doing this, right? And back to Mr. Romero's point, kind of being high level, kind of why we're doing what we're doing, right? So I think that's super important. I just wouldn't take anything for granted because and remember that it will pay off, right? You put in the diligent effort, you work hard, you put in the time, it will all pay off. So, and then the other thing is, if anyone ever wants to contact me or kind of take my advice, I'm always available. We have a great team of mentors as well who are willing to help. So,
yeah, no, I think that's great advice. Definitely take a diligent attitude, and the content that's on the platform, it is very advanced, and to some cases very technical. And I tell some of my students, listen, by the time you complete the program, especially the eBay, PayPal, corporate spinoff case study that we have in there, you complete all of those case studies, you'll be ahead of your college professors. You know more than them. And they're surprised. But obviously, you're definitely an example of that, just like many of our other alumni that have completed the program. So with that being said, look, I want to thank you for sharing your story, giving us your time. I think a lot of our students are going to find this conversation very insightful. And don't be surprised if some of them start reaching out to you about your experience and maybe wanting to speak with you. But people can also find you on our platform, especially students in the Analyst Prep Program. They can also follow you on LinkedIn as well. So with that being said, thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed the session, and I'll see you in the other one. Take care.
Thank you, guys. Yep. Take care. Thanks, Mr. Romero.
All right. You're welcome, buddy.